staying with us. The hashtag on X is Citizen DayBreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. With me in studio this morning on my far right is Dr. Maxwell Miawa, International Development Law Scholar. Good morning, Dr.
Good morning.
Lovely having you here on the broadcast, and thanks for making time. Dr. Hassan Kanenje next to him is Director at the Horn International Institute. Good morning, Dr.
Good morning.
Lovely having you. Dr. Edgar Gidua is International Affairs, Diplomacy and Security Commentator. Good morning.
Morning, Ayub.
Lovely having you. Ahmed Hashi is Governance Analyst. Good morning, Ahmed.
Asante, good morning.
Thank you. Gentlemen, let's begin with what's been happening in the country before we turn our attention. Of course, dovetails the idea of our main focus here of topic, which is the diplomacy aspect of it. Yesterday, Amnesty International released a report, the 2024-25 report on the state of human rights in the country, and this, as the Independent Policing and Oversight Authority says, it's probing the killing of 60 protesters a year later as victims' identities are revealed. That's on page number 7 of the Daily Nation. As you can see, the breakdown of Kenyans who were killed, circumstances under which they had died, and the status of the investigation, the region, and the victim's identity. The number totals up to 60, and you can see Nairobi has the lion's share of Kenyans who fell. This include, of course, during the Gen Z-led demonstrations last year against the proposals that were contained in the now dead Finance Bill 2024. The front page of the Standard also says, unmoved by bloodshed, even as the nation reels from a damning expose revealing extrajudicial killings during last year's protest, fresh reports have emerged, says the paper, of live bullets that were used against residents in Narok County. And the question it's putting is, are the security heads in the country aware of their constitutional duty, chief among them the protection of human life? Dr. Maxwell, beginning with you, how does this paint Kenya amongst the community of nations?
That's an intriguing question. I think human rights abuses are always contemporaneous with perhaps governments that still have teething problems. We recall that at the very beginning, this was the first finance bill that the government was passing at a time when also the government was facing internal revolt of some sort from within. And that happened to have prompted a very massive young generation revolt against the government. And I think in some way or another, the police must have been more brutal, must have treated this protest with a lot of brutality. Of course, it gives the government of Kenya a very bad image internationally, looking particularly that this report is also coming from international sources, the BBC and so forth. And the question I think the government now has to address is, how do we put these incidences in the very past? One thing for certain, that every other young government that is still trying to bar, that is still trying to set its foot, always characterized by a lot of these instabilities of whatever nature. And because young governments are always still, they're still not established themselves, they always tend to react like this. But I think you have seen that in the recent past, particularly since the broad-based government was formulated, I think some of these incidences have taken a backseat, including, forced disappearances, and that, I think that is a good start. A good start for the government, broad-based government, going into the future.
Okay, and Dr. Kanenje, given the instances under which all these had happened, how does then the government walk back from the position which has put it rather under sharp scrutiny, given the violations of human rights that we had witnessed last year and the start of this year, 2025?
What is interesting this week, it was actually supposed to be a week of good news, considering the kind of commitments that the president was able to get from China. And so generally, that is supposed to be a good week. Unfortunately, life works in mysterious ways. Mm-hmm. And so we find ourselves going back to a year ago. Now, I think the question is not what exactly was raised, is that someone has been sleeping on the job for far too long. Mm-hmm. Has been sleeping on the job because, one, in the aftermath of this, of course, we knew not just the country, but the world was always going to be interested in what happened. Nothing like this has been witnessed around the world, I think, since the revolution in the Philippines, in 1986, Ferdinand Marcos. And so to the extent that young people came out in the streets, and which the president himself acknowledged, and said, I've listened and I've heard the voices, they should have been a consistent, deliberate commitment to try and investigate, exactly what happened. Because stuff like this, we cannot exactly wash it, away. It's always going to come back to haunt us. And so I suspect someone was sleeping on the job in a way in which, we swept this under the carpet, hoping it was going to go away. Now, we have seen attempts to respond from many, many quarters, voices and stuff like that, which again actually makes things worse. There has to be a very thoughtful, deliberate response. And so whoever is in charge of communication, I think the president will actually fire him or her, because they're doing a pretty bad job, okay, at that. You see, you can't, the question is, when people are showing these images and stuff like that, first of all, are they false? So we need to ask ourselves. Now, if they are true, what will be the best way to actually respond to stuff like this? Because dismissing or painting the messenger in a very negative light does not exactly help you in the information age, because a lot of this thing now is spread around the world. So I think we need to be sober and not hysterical in responding to it, because we are a sovereign country at the end of the day. And of course, we have a right to question the intentions of those who are trying perhaps to share this. But at the same time, we also have a responsibility not to our own citizens, but to the world, to be able to tell them the truth, but to say it in a way that it makes us credible and not for us to look defensive and really disorganized.
Yeah. Dr. Gedua, did the president, in the aftermath of June 25th, squander a golden opportunity granted to him by the Gen Zs to look into the governance structure, given the incompetence that had riddled his cabinet because of the choices he made when he formed his government, and making another blunder of reconstituting a cabinet that was not endeared to the people, and therefore opening the wave after wave of slip-ups by his administrations?
Yeah, thanks. I think what happened, there was a golden opportunity of therefore, let's say, resetting back, going back to factory settings. But then again, also remember, politics is all about interests, and certain constituencies that the president felt he needed to, number one, please. The president was also hard-pressed to, going and looking for new fresh faces all of a sudden, and some of his colleagues had actually left elective posts to come and join cabinet. So I think there was that dilemma. But there was an opportunity to actually going back and probably, let's say, appointing technocrats, real technocrats, people who are, I always have this view that, for example, given the opportunity, appoint someone who is credible and who understands whatever docket you appoint them in. And in this sense, maybe you get a chance of professionalizing, government structure and all that. So there was a missed opportunity there because, number one, he was forced to retain some people who probably the public felt did not deserve to come back. But again, getting rid of them, there's a cost-benefit analysis from his perspective. If I get rid of some of these strong allies, what happened to those constituencies that they're coming from? So that was a political decision. In as much as there was an opportunity to reset things back to, let's say, a right setting, there was those political considerations for him to make. So he could not get rid of some people for whatever reason. And then now, bringing in a new crop, fresh team, people who, quote unquote, were untainted or did not have any baggage, and then seemingly before they settle down and get to understand the politics of government, they created that. I think the heat that was generated because of the Gen Z protest last year, the government lost a lot of goodwill. And that is not goodwill that is easy to recover anywhere in the world, in any jurisdiction, given the gravity of whatever happened. So I think even if he had appointed, I don't know whether you remember years ago, Abib, maybe we were all young, when President Moi appointed a dream team. Back in the days, he brought in Leakey and some very huge names into government. When you have lost the goodwill because of the Gen Z protests, regardless of who you bring on board, it is not easy to recover. So I think that is what the government is still reeling from. And of course, this expose has just reopened old wounds and, like my colleagues have said, reopened old wounds and taken us back to ask very deep questions. Why didn't we have some semblance of information coming forward before the expose?
Yeah. And in your view, then, did the political considerations by the head of state override public considerations? Because look at what the young Kenyans have raised: good governance, including stoppage of financial leakages, corruption. You had seen the behavior of some cabinet secretaries who are doing all that in the midst of an economic downturn. And still, the president is navigating rather very murky waters, is it? And it's a case of shooting himself in the foot, because did he squander that very opportunity was granted to turn around the aspect of how Kenyans view the government?
I think he was between a rock and a hard place. He was in a very, very, like you said, very murky waters. Because regardless, political considerations still he had to consider political considerations even in reconstituting that cabinet. Because if he was to, assuming fire everyone from cabinet and bring in a fresh set of faces, he would be bringing in on board a team probably untried, untested. And then the ones he has fired are people who probably have walked him in his political journey over a period of 10, 15, 20 years. I think for a politician, in my view, I don't think he would have made that consideration. So it's a delicate balancing act between pleasing the public and political survival. So that is where now mistakes are made. To what extent do you please the public, and to what extent do you ensure that you have a team that has your back, that can protect you? Those considerations. So the optics are very different depending on who wants to analyze it. Okay. There was an opportunity for him to make serious change, and in his view, I think, doing all that, that's what he had to do.
Yes, Ahmed.
Well, there's a comprehensive word in the French language called a coup de mort, which is a deathly finishing blow. The police forces attacked young people and murdered them in cold blood. That's exactly what happened. They had no legal right to shoot at these young people. I think that we ought to call this country the way it is and not put any chocolate on top of what essentially is a failed government that was nearly overthrown by the generation that will probably go down in the history of this country as the golden generation, because for the first time in our political economy, this generation and this group of people are asking for fundamental political and economic questions. They are not asking for fundamental political questions that surround ethnicity, that surround tribal groupings, that surround failed political leadership. They want to transform this country from a village to the modern world so that this country can stand up for its creed. And I think what the government did is they bore its teeth, and they killed people. And the government today does not know where to go, what to do, and how to do it. It is so extreme that it went and brought Mr. Odinga into the government as a stabilizing force, and this has made Mr. Odinga a dangerous man in this country, where his support has dwindled by at least 80%. Mr. Ruto is not going to come back. I predict Mr. Ruto is going to lose the election. He could quote this back to me on the television. My predictions, as you know, Mr. Ayub, are made of stunner stuff and tobacco. And I want you to question me after we come here after the elections, because this country is at the throes of transformation. And I firmly believe that as patriots, we ought to call it out like that. If we do not talk like this and try and fix our country and bring out an honest conversation about the way forward, what is going to happen is that the frustrations are just going to blow up all over again. You know that people live on $1 a day. You know that the healthcare has collapsed. You know that the economy is not functioning. You can tell the children on the streets and the programs that this government tried to bring are not there. You can see the recriminations inside the government of its own ministers, not me. This is not my theoretical position. It is them who are in there who have come out to speak about the corruption that is happening. The president himself has spoken about being asked for billions of shillings, probably the worst thing that he could ever say on television, because his handlers are afraid of him. They can't tell him, Mr. President, you cannot speak like this on national TV. And now the international community, where our foreign policy, of course, has failed. You know that the president has gone to China. He has flip-flopped. You know, he went to Biden, and he was a special guest who was given the Guard of Honor salute at the White House, Pennsylvania. What's the address? 1600 Pennsylvania. Yeah. And it's now he thinks that the international community and diplomacy is Western Province, and some are in Rift Valley, and some he thinks are in Northern Kenya. He's treating the international community as tribal groupings instead of understanding international political economy. And I think this is a failure. And that failure needs to be called out, Ayub, and it needs to be treated with the contempt that it deserves, because this is our country. Okay. We happen to elect the president to give us direction with his administration, and that has failed. And we ought to call him out for it. Okay.
And Dr. Maxwell, given what has been happening in the country, and then coupled with the events we witnessed yesterday and the day before in Narok County, I mean, the extent to which more than 5 people can be killed, what does it tell about the reforms that we had sought so much in the aftermath of the post-election violence? I mean, 1 in 3 of the more than 1,300 Kenyans killed, according to the report, after the post-election violence was by police bullet. Then we brought about the reforms IPOA was created. But still, brute force seems to be the order of the day for security officials. Seems we haven't transitioned.
There's what we call police cultures in Africa. One of the dominant police cultures is what we call the brutalization or police brutality. And I think the police administrators, the Interior Department, has not really understood and deeply internalized the context of our constitutional accountability. That even as you wield that gun, you are still a public officer who is accountable to the people, and who is accountable to certain standards. If you look at Section 245 of the Constitution, the reality in Kenya is that we are still acclimatized, or perhaps tethered, to the old notions of policing in Kenya. And by the way, the other one that I've forgotten is what we call the militarization of the police in Kenya, the lack of accountability in the police cultures. I think going forward, we need a reorientation, actually, an intellectual rearmament of the Kenyan police force. Some of these things happen at the grassroots level because there is no adequate training. There is no familiarization of the police with the current constitutional standards of accountability, human rights standards. And you cannot blame a simple police officer there based in Narok or in West Pokot, because they really do not know.
Yes.
You know, it only hits them when the government takes account, when IPOA start the investigation, then they get to learn. And it applies as well to the culture of corruption in Kenya. The culture of corruption in Kenya is because the police actually do not even understand how accountability within the governance structure works. That's why you still have, they are being busted by EACC officers, and the culture is still predominant. And I can tell you, the same site where the EACC officers arrest the police, 2-3 hours later, the culture of bribe-taking still goes on in that culture. What does it tell you? Lack of reorientation. Lack of intellectual rearmament to the culture of accountability, the rule of law in Kenya today. You know, old habits die hard, and I think old cultures also die hard. We are still living with a police which has a mindset of probably the provincial administration of the 1900s. That was actually crafted by the colonial officers. You know, it was crafted to deal with the black people, police brutality, to put people in camps. Today, if anyone understands policing, though I'm not an expert in that area, perhaps Mr. Ashe can, governance through public policing has to have a humane approach. You know, we are dealing perhaps, in fact, that's why this expose is coming. The police do not understand that in this day and age of technology, you can be recorded anywhere and your face can be exposed anywhere. So before you do that thing of brutality to any other person, please know that even the public is watching, and one day you'll be held accountable.
Dr. Kanenje, what's the aggregate a consequence of the actions by our security agencies in the context of the rule of law, democracy, and the principles of good governance, and given Kenya's status among the community of nations?
It goes without saying that any extrajudicial killings, puts us in a very bad light. But I think, Ayub, there's something I would like to speak to that perhaps we don't normally focus on. And I think what contributes to some of these actions, especially by our security forces, and that has to do with adequate preparation when it comes to responding to situations where there's either events or potential events of conflagration between groups. You see, if I take 20 policemen, or policewomen for that matter, and I'm having a bunch of hundreds of rowdy people who literally want, baying for the blood of each other, chances are they're going to be overwhelmed and their own lives are going to be at risk. And because of that, they either have to run away or they have to use excessive force to be able to put that away. And what we've seen consistently sometimes is not so much because these police are, going there, they're baying for people's blood, but they're put in circumstances where they're actually not adequately prepared to respond to the threat, meaning there is no adequate threat assessment that we've undertaken with regard to the potential for conflict, or if there is, then we are too few and reinforcement is sent in too late, or is sent in without appropriate tools and equipment to actually respond to that. So then only the bullet then becomes a response, and that should not be. And we have seen protests take place all over the world, But in some of advanced economies or organized societies, what we see is when they're anticipating 100,000 people are going to turn out, then the force posture is going to be proportional to that, in a way that is going to preempt such things from even happening. We collect enough intelligence to even figure out who is actually intent in causing more trouble than others. And then those people are isolated or removed from the crowd, from others. Okay. But when we don't, and we are sending few people, few policemen or women, and without proper equipment, actually we're putting them in harm's way, you see. And then you force them to start thinking sometimes in survival terms. And survival terms is either take you out or perhaps I'm going to run the risk of losing my own life. And so I think that is an anchor that sometimes we don't. So when there are such incidents, I think our analysis should also look at that. And I think in Kenya, it has had a lot actually to do with insufficient preparation, as well as knowledge and understanding of certain dynamics in terms of responding to crowd violence. Yeah.
Dr. Githua, given the list that we have seen of what IPOA had released yesterday, 60 cases in total, circumstances under which they had died, Nairobi has the lion's share, definitely, and this was also at the height of the demonstrations last year. What then is blocking our institutions created by Katiba to perform as required, given the delays that we had witnessed with this?
Okay. I'm sure from my past point of view, and probably if they talked, it's just the investigations themselves probably are getting bungled at the level of information. So trying to reach out to the relevant people, asking them, trying to investigate. Remember, even as IPOA is trying to investigate, there is the police force and the entire system. Some of this information will not come out to the fore because, granted, people will not want to give out the information. Witnesses will not want to come forward. The element that there was fear that was spread around is probably what has probably created an issue where enough information is not being gathered, such that IPOA has not yet made its report. Or conversely, because none of us probably is privy to that information, maybe IPOA has presented a whole file and a case of actionable evidence and nobody has taken up the next step to hold people accountable. So right now, I would simply say, with the fear that was created based on the brutality and the killings that were meted out, gathering information in that atmosphere may not have been the very easiest. And if IPOA probably narrowed down and actually came up with a report stating this is what happened, the lack of action on that is probably because of the repercussions that would come out of it, or the can of worms that would be opened up. So the BBC expose has actually, I'm sure it has pricked IPOA's conscience as well, if at all they had done their report and handed it over to the relevant people, and then it's not been acted on. So this is a prick on the collective conscience of the security apparatus and on Kenyans, because it has exposed, and the questions now that Kenyans are asking are, why didn't we have this information well in advance?
Ahmed, it's bothering, is it? 1 year later, we have no conclusive outcome of Kenyans who are felled by police bullet.
Yes, the great George Orwell wrote a book called 1984. And in it, he said that if you want to keep a secret, you also must keep the secret from yourself. You know, you have to, that's the way you can keep a secret. So the government is living in something called a post-truth. It has come and found the bubble of the neo-colonial state and its economy, and it exploded on its face. And they have no ideas about how to deal with police. They have no idea to deal with the economy. They have no idea how to deal with the international community, because the administration that was elected into office is perhaps the most incompetent administration this country has ever had. There's no question about that in my mind. Every Kenyan today that is any corner of this country is up in arms. And Kenyans are a very conservative society. They normally do not want to stir the broth, nor do they want to add salt to it. But today, in every area from Transmara, you could see in Narok there where police just shot other people without any kind of concern. And I think that nobody's against the police. The police are low paid, they have no housing, they're treated badly, they're subaltern, as my learned friend there has written. They come from the colonial system. Their culture is one of brutality. We do not oppose the police, we oppose police brutality. You know, there's a distinction to be made there. The second point is that the leadership is the one that is responsible. It's not the common askari of the road. He takes his command and he takes his instructions. But it is the minister in charge of internal security. And as we know, our president micromanages every department. He gives out instructions over the phone. This has come out in when his opposition just left the government. The telephones that are being sent to each other, the direct commands that are being sent to each other. You could tell that the president has become a paramount chief in this country. I argued that point, and Mr. Khanenje remembers sitting next to me on another station, where I said that the man is going to ruin this country. He's going to not bring people together. And that is exactly what is happening. I did not want that to happen, and I warned him specifically on that program, and I said, do not be a paramount chief. And I knew this was coming, and it has come. And I think that the culture of lies, Bana Ayub, is that you could see Mr. Mutua, our minister, what is he the minister of now?
Labour.
Labour, who in this culture of lies has again done a chap-chap. You remember he was the governor of Machakos, and he did the chap-chap maram. And so forth. He's running this office in a chap-chap terms. And the president also has become a president of chap-chap. Kenyans need to go and stand up for this country come the next election and throw this administration out.
Thank you, gentlemen. When we get back from the break, we now turn our attention to the concluded state visit to China by President William Ruto. The hyperactive first 100 days of Donald Trump, his second coming at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. That's the White House. That's location in D.C. The reshaping global world order and the involvement of Kenya in the conflict in Sudan. Yesterday, by the way, the Prime Cabinet Secretary, gentlemen, told the Senate committee that some MPs had planned to travel to Taiwan when Ruto was in China. And we'll talk about that and some of the sound bites that he had given in relation to that and what this DIM policy just means from a foreign policy perspective. All that after the break here on the broadcast. Stay tuned.